Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from beautiful Florida. And today our question comes to us from Nicole Samuel. And Nicole has a very interesting question. She would like to hear about the practice of veiling within paganism. And she says she's very interested to learn more. And so that's our question today, but there are a few caveats we have to start with. And one of them is that to address this subject in total would take a lot more than this vlog, so we're only going to be able to hit a few highlights. The other caveat is it's very hard to say exactly what is meant in this question by veiling. Are we talking about social veiling, such as you see in some parts of the Muslim world today? Are we talking about religious veiling, such as you might have seen in parts of the Roman Empire? That is a big diversity in terms of how to answer it. The second part is, what do we mean by paganism? Are we referring to all of the pagans who have ever lived? That's an awful lot to answer. And I'm going to narrow the subject to Western paganism, the Mediterranean and Northern Europe. And of course there's also the question, are we talking about historic paganism or modern paganism? And I'm going to speak a little bit to both. So on the subject of social veiling, let's start by saying that in Western paganism, this was mostly not a thing. Egyptian women, for example, definitely did not practice anything like that. Neither did Roman women for the most part. Germanic and Celtic women definitely did not. And you really see nothing like social veiling among these people. Now, certainly women who lived in inclement climates would cover their head because of the elements, but that's not the same thing as social veiling. So we can kind of dismiss social veiling from those people. Now, as we look toward Eastern Europe, the picture is not quite as clear because we know, for example, that women among the Scythians and a little bit farther south among the Hittites did wear veils, but we don't know if they all wore them or if they represent special offices or special circumstances. There's just not enough known about those societies. The veils they wore, however, were part of their headdress and never covered their face so far as we know. However, as we move, again, into the southern Mediterranean, we do see some practice of what might be called social veiling. And a lot of people focus on contemporary Muslim veiling, the hijab, which covers the hair but leaves the face open, the burqa, which covers everything. And both of these actually predate Islam. And the practice of covering the hair with something like a hijab had been practiced by Christian women in what would become the Muslim world for at least 200 years, and continue to be practiced in Christianity, especially Orthodox Christianity, right up until living memory. And in fact, there are parts of the world today where you'll still find women doing it who are Orthodox Christian. And there's really no difference between the way they cover their heads and the way that Muslim women wearing hijabs cover theirs. Now, as to the burqa, the practice of covering from head to foot, in parts of Greco-Roman Syria, we see reliefs that show women doing this during the Greco-Roman period. So it predates Islam as well. Whether these were women in special offices or of particular social classes is harder to say, but there definitely were some women who were doing it. And you'll see, particularly in parts of Syria, women who are wearing a very encompassing himation that leaves only one eye open to look out on the world, and usually with a little triangle open in the cloth. And this symbol of the eye and the downward pointing triangle in that region became a symbol of goddess. So this too is an older practice. And so those pagans must be said to have practiced social veiling to a greater or lesser extent. Now, as to religious veiling, it's an entirely different matter. And there were certainly a number of circumstances in which pagans have practiced this. Historically, I think the most significant is Rome. And in Rome, priests and priestesses were in the habit of veiling their head when they were officiating a religious ceremony, and I believe also when they were in prayer. And this was a veil that left the face open, but when in full use tended to obscure the side vision, and there was a very particular reason for this. The Romans were very sensitive to omens, and they believed that during a religious observance there must be no bad omens, and if there was a bad omen they would stop the observance. Then they would do divination and decide whether to start over from the beginning or to scrap it for another day. Now, with this belief, they also did their best not to see any bad omens. And so, at Roman religious observances, you will see that there was usually an aulos player playing during the rite, and an aulos looks a lot like a modern flute, but it sounded a lot more like a bagpipe. And you'll see the priest or priestess will have a veil up over their head. And the reasons for this is that the aulos would drown out any ill-omened sound for the most part, and the veil made it impossible for the priest or priestess to see any ill omens to either side of them. It would have to be directly in front of them. And of course, there were certainly circumstances under which an omen could still be seen or heard, despite these precautions, but there was certainly no question of whether it was an omen when that was the case. So that would be, I think, the preeminent example of veiling in Roman priesthood, to be sure. Now, in modern paganism, the main place that you'll see this kind of ritual veiling is in historical reconstructionist movements recreating the circumstances I just described, or you'll sometimes see it when people are doing oracles, especially in the Fellowship of Isis. A priest or priestess doing an oracle often wears a veil to cover their face. The reasons for this are these. One, it shields them from extraneous influences because giving an oracle means going into a trance, and you don't want anything to disturb that. The veil shuts that out. It also obscures the oracle's face to underline the fact that the oracle is coming from spirit, not from the person. And these are the primary reasons for the veiling. So you'll see veiling in that context. The only other context I can think of that is common in contemporary paganism is the practice of wearing a hood, which is more or less the same thing as a veil. And in my experience, this is usually connected to rites involving ancestors and spirits, and has to do with the idea of the world beyond the veil, the afterlife, the world of spirit. And in those rituals, sometimes the hood will be brought up in very much the same way that the Roman priest or priestess used their veil. And again, it represents that these are rites that have to do with ancestors. So these are the main instances I can think of. Perhaps some of our viewers will think of others. But that's mostly what I have to say about it. I hope you find it helpful. And until next time, may you blessed be. Hello! This is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you for Pagans Tonight Radio. Pagans Tonight Radio is an online radio network with different hosts and different shows 7 nights a week. There's something for every taste, including Spanish language programming on Saturday evening. Check out paganstonight.com today.